Good morning and welcome to Sunday Story Hour, where we share real life stories of how human design has helped our guests know themselves on a deep, transformative level. By knowing and trusting ourselves, we develop deeper, more honest relationships and unlock our true gifts. I'm Kathy Bashanko, and my guest this week is Lindsay Tucker. Lindsay's a 2-4 reflector that I met at the conference in Colorado in September. And she gave an amazing talk on, and I'm paraphrasing, but on knowing ourselves and our narrative and how important our narrative is. And I just was like, wait a minute, that's exactly what I'm always talking about. So I knew I had to get her on here for two reasons. One was that great presentation, and two, Lindsay's my first reflector. I'm so excited. Hi, Lindsay.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then you can feel free to dive right into telling us your story of how you wound up doing all this, how you found out about human design and being this weird enigma of life.
Absolutely. So my name is Lindsay Tucker. Right now, I am the owner of Reflector by Design, and it's a blog and online space for reflectors exclusively. And I cater to reflectors because we are the 1%. We're I would say the most underserved kind of human design type. And so my goal with that is just to help empower human design reflectors and allow them to live their most aligned selves as reflectors in a world that was created by the 99%. So in addition to that, I also host programs for other types, and I deliver those through a reflector lens. And I'll share my human design story with you. It happened, I think it was 3.5 years ago, right at the beginning of COVID. I discovered human design because I think 3 people told me all within, a 24-hour period about this thing called human design. And I'd never heard of it. And I was so curious because, I don't know, like many people, I like doing those personality tests and finding out what my type was. And when I looked and I saw all that blankness on the screen, all these empty centers, I just kind of sat stunned for, I think, a few hours. I was very quiet. Could have been a few hours, could have been a few days. I didn't really talk to many people as I was processing all of these things. And it really helped me to see things more clearly as I looked backwards through my whole life, all these different events, my decision points, like these major things that had happened. I now had this reflector lens that I could see things through, and it helped to make sense for all of these things. And so that was at that point where I asked myself 2 very critical questions. What does it all mean, and what am I going to do about it? Because I thought, I've done all these personality tests. They've never given me any next steps or any way to live as that type, and human design actually has this. So I thought, what am I going to make it mean for me? And that's where I had to sit kind of long and hard and really feel into that decision about what I wanted to do with it. And I emerged from that knowing that I wanted to live as closely aligned to my design as possible, and that brought me here.
So when you say you had to sit with it, was that something you already knew to do, or was that something you did because you read that you're meant to wait? Because that's very in strategy for a reflector, right? Wait a lunar cycle. So you find out you're this reflector who's supposed to wait a lunar cycle, and you got to wait to know what to do with it, right? Was that already something you kind of knew about yourself?
You know what? At first, it was more of a stunned reaction because I wasn't sure, what do I do next? What are the next steps? How do I live as a reflector? I knew that in my past I'd made decisions very quickly and it did not work out well for me. So I was thinking to myself, how am I going to incorporate these decision-making strategies into my life and help to kind of slow things down in a way that that's comfortable for me. And of course, I started thinking about all the different areas of my life. How do I make these slower decisions in my relationship? How do I make them in my kind of career choices and things like that? So there was a lot of just unknown, and I think I sat with them for so long just because I was letting it all sink in, not really knowing that waiting was really what I needed. And that's something I've got to play with and practice the more I'm on this human design journey.
Yeah. So then what you, after you waited, did you feel like there was one thing that while you're waiting, I guess I should say, did you feel like there was one thing that you really remember thinking, now I understand this, like something about your life that really all of a sudden made some sense?
I understood my conditioning a lot better. So I grew up in a house that actually my dad is a reflector, a 6'2", just like me, and my mom is a manifesting generator. And their structure and systems that they put in place to help our household run as I was growing up, I had fully kind of embraced those and hung on to them even as an adult. And I realized that there were a lot of things that they had done that I was just continuing to do because it was all I had known. But what it really comes down to was giving myself permission to look at areas in my life where I've experienced conditioning and really say, like, does this still work for me or does it not? Is it serving me or is it not? So that was, I think my family influence was probably the biggest thing that I had that kind of realization about.
So were you able to tell your father that he was a reflector also?
You know, it's harder to explain to some people than others. So I have explained it to my family, and even when I was about to present at the International Human Design Conference, my mom says to me, "I still don't think I understand what you're doing." So
Husband says that too. He was just on my call the other day, and I was like asking him after. He's like, I still just don't even understand what any of it means. And it's like
yeah,
sometimes we are not, especially, and that is something I want to apologize to everybody for my squeaky voice. I am fighting a cold, so I sound ridiculous at times. Sometimes I'm feeling like a cartoon character. But with being a 6'2" or any left angle personality or profiles, we're here for strangers mostly, right? We're not necessarily here for the people who, is saying we're not here for. That's, language is tricky. And that's one of the things I loved that you talked about. It's not that we're not here for them, but our message and what we're teaching a lot of times is better received by people a little further away from us, right? So, but my husband, he's very logical brain. He's got all kinds of logical circuitry and he's open to it. He keeps trying, but he's like, so I need to find a logical brain person who can talk to him in a way that is more man speak, right? But yeah, so your dad and your mom are both kind of like,
yeah, and that's okay because
right,
I've found ways to let them know about me and how I do things that is not necessarily pulling them into the human design world. So for example, I'll say things to them if they ask me to commit to something. I say, I make decisions really slowly, otherwise it doesn't work and I end up backing out of my decision. So that helps them to say, oh, okay, if I push, I'm going to get a quick answer, but it's probably not going to be the final answer. And,
right.
with so many people seeking that certainty, they're more interested in getting a final answer than they are getting a quick answer. So I think explaining it like that, and that way they don't need to know all the ins and outs of human design because not everybody is ready or wanting to hear those things.
Yeah, right. Um, I have a nephew who's a reflector and I've never even told him because I know he would be like, yeah, whatever, right? I just know enough about his stuff, right? But so going back to finding out about this, you found your design in the same time as your husband, right? Found his, like, 'cause your husband's a projector. He was
Yeah,
also.
yeah.
And so not a defined sacral between you, right? And still stay open.
Yep.
Yeah. I noticed I ran our connection chart, and what's really interesting is that although we do have some electromagnetic connections, we don't define any new centers for me. I still am
Mm.
I'm still 6 and 3, 6 defined, 3 open, which is very rare that that would happen, I would think. So you don't, so in a way, I'm just I'm reflecting on what that feels like to me because I feel like I can very much be me in a way that doesn't feel like, I don't know, my brain's, I
I
can't,
think
I
that
don't
means
know,
I'm doing a good job as a reflector. Then if you feel like you can be your truest self,
right?
then that's good. Then that means I'm holding the right amount of space for you here. So
Okay, so now that's an interesting thing. So yeah, so this is your openness has to be able to be truly open and not get hung up on what you're reflecting, not getting that caught in you. But also, isn't that something to say about, like, if a person needs the other person to reflect back a certain something, then that can be a problem. Like, is that, and this sounds like I'm now turning praise into me, but isn't that also about me knowing who I am and not feeling that? And none of that's the fact that, because the chart is going to look the same whether you and I were a mess or not, if we were both really deep in our not self, right?
yeah.
And we have a really icky feeling. But the fact that it feels good.
Then that's a big thumbs up. That means,
Right.
I'm, as a reflector, if you feel comfortable with me, if you feel, aligned, and you feel your sense you're a projector, so that successful, like, yes, I'm accomplishing something, I'm doing it, then that's me showing you that you're on the right track. There have been times, and I've had conversations with people, and I can see they get their back up because I'm reflecting this not self theme that they're showing me about themselves. And it sometimes can, it can cause this weird feedback loop where they're in a mood or they're in a state, and so I reflect it, and it just kind of goes back and forth, and it's not very productive. That's why it's really important for reflectors to engage with people and know when to stop if it's not going to be a kind of a productive encounter or dialogue. You really have to have that willingness on the other part, or that readiness for them to have a conversation. So luckily for me, my best friend is a manifesting generator, and there are times when we'll go back and forth kind of in a frustrated state, and she'll say to me, like, you're just reflecting me, aren't you? And I say, yeah, like, and so it helps her to kind of pause and say, okay, where are things not quite right? But she's in a place where she's willing to do that and have those conversations. Not everybody is.
Yeah. And so here's I'm trying to phrase this in a way that doesn't come across different than I mean it, but is there no responsibility of the reflector? Like in that situation, is it always that the reflector's reflecting back the person, or can a misaligned project or a reflector really just like take in somebody's energy and just reflect it back in a wonky way?
Yeah, 100%. For a reflector to be effective, I think they have to have an acknowledgement that here's what your purpose is in life. Here's what your type is designed to do. Are you willing to accept that challenge? And whether it's that person doesn't know they're a reflector, or they don't care, or whatever it might be, they're still going to be doing that reflecting because that's their design. What they do with it is up to them. So
How would you explain, like you just said, what their purpose in, like the general purpose of a reflector, or in quantum human design, they call it a calibrator. Just for those watching who have never met a reflector or just are not familiar with it yet, explain how you would explain that.
in a nutshell, reflectors are here to show others what's possible. And that can be individual, like one-on-one conversations. So what happens sometimes when I'm chatting with people, whether it's the clients I work with or just people I meet, I can sense very deeply what their sort of inner desires are, their secret desires, even things that they sometimes are too scared to share with themselves because it's outside their comfort zone. And so I can kind of naturally pull those things out of them. And then I that's what it means to show them what's possible. When it's in a kind of a collective and in a group, it's very much about kind of what projectors do, right? Projectors are great guides and saying, like, I can tell you're meant to do this and this person's meant to do that and that. Reflectors, when we're in more of a group, it becomes more about the dynamic. And so it's just a matter of seeing people very deeply, feeling them very deeply, and then showing them little bits of that depth to kind of leave the breadcrumbs to so that hopefully they want to follow it and, you know, express their true selves. Not everybody's going to be up for that journey.
Yeah. And so the particular gates that a reflector has defined, like I was noting that you have quite a few gates defined on your identity center, and one of them is the gate of the narrative. So I thought that was telling that that's what your talk was all about at Human Design. And I do want to get into some of the meat of that in a minute. But so do you feel that in that reflecting back of others, like, so for example, I have a defined identity center. So as you amplify and reflect that back, how does the specifics of a reflector's design come through in that amplification?
Well, I'll give you the example using that gate that's all about the narrative, right? So for me, I help people make sense of their story. So you might tell me a story about a situation that's happening with you, and in my mind and in my body, I can feel what happened to you kind of past tense, where you are right now and how you're feeling and experiencing things, and then provide insight about sort of like the next steps, not in a way that is definitive. If you do this, then you'll have this, but more showing you what's possible if you reframe that story, if you see these little sort of nuggets of wisdom. Sometimes it's hard when you're in a situation. We feel the difficulty of that situation, but it takes an outside view to say, actually, did you think about it this way, or did you redefine how you see things in a way that might be a little more productive and help you to move forward in a way that's going to really serve you?
Yeah, and so I have a new toy, guys. I'm playing with this new thing. So if you can see Lindsay's chart a little bit here, but if you want to see it better, there is a link in the video if you want to see her chart a little bit more clearly, but just a little fun bit there. So I just wanted to put that up there. And so tell me a little bit, or tell our guests or those watching a little bit about the stuff that you were talking about at conference. I should have looked up the title of it, but it was very interesting because, correct me if I'm paraphrasing this wrong, but you found about the Human Design Conference not having any experience with Karen Curry Parker, right? And so here you come and you do this whole presentation about the narrative. And like, that's what her whole dissertation was just on, about the power of words and all this stuff, and how this was like the next day, her big presentation was going to be about this. And she's the one organizing the conference. And she was like, okay, she even had you even had a similar slide in there to hers. And it was like, wow. And I feel like that's such a telling thing, like, inspiration goes out through the head into the universe, right? And our inspired thoughts go out, and who knows who else is picking them up and amplifying them in our own undefined areas or whatever. So you gave this wonderful talk, and I'm not saying it was the same as Karen's, but I'm saying there was a very similar feeling to it. But what did you call it again?
So it was the stories we tell ourselves and how to use human design to thrive from them. And it was all about the way we view things. Even, any event that we have in our lives goes through this filter in our minds and in our bodies, and we come up with a meaning. Here's what this event means. And so often we define those things based on how we think and not how we feel. So by clinging to maybe it's an expectation. I gave a presentation and it didn't go well, therefore I'm a failure. Like that's an interpretation, but that's a very thinking kind of logical thing. But too often we are in our thinking minds, and it takes us out of our body, because what we're here to do is to really serve using our strategy and authority as that guiding sort of compass. So my talk was all about the way we even interpret our own human design. Like when I found out I was a reflector, I processed things and I made it mean things about myself that maybe it's going to be difficult for me to make decisions. Maybe people aren't going to understand me. And so all these things I started telling myself because I had a narrative about what my life should look like based on conditioning and expectations. And then this type of reflector did not fit neatly into that timeline and into the, that box. So it's all about just understanding that we get to decide, what does it mean and what are we going to do about it? Because anytime you are presented with a situation, you get to interpret what it means and really what you're going to do about it. So it's a bit of encouragement, but also just helping people to see that kind of what you see is not what you get. And two people can go through the exact same, situation or life event and come out very differently, like siblings who are both raised in a dysfunctional home. One person may say, okay, this is my destiny. I'm just going to, live in this state of dysfunction. The other person says, I'm going to rise above and make a better life for myself. Those are that's a perfect example of how things can be differently interpreted. And my hope as a reflector is to help other people kind of through this narrative that I help them create, that we can rewrite these stories in a way that's more productive, more aligned, and just feels better and more supportive for what they are here to do. And that's for all types, not just for reflectors.
Sure. Yeah, that's really great. And it's funny that you use the example of a presentation that didn't go well, because you and I talked right after I had my first Zoom class I attempted to teach. And what was the most amazing about it, there were so many great things about it, the fact that it didn't work. And it made me think of, there was a book I read years ago by Kyle Cease that was called I Hope I Screw This Up. And it really was kind of like, I'm kind of really glad for the mistakes that happened, because it taught me so many things. And the biggest thing it taught me was when I went back after, hanging up and telling my husband, oh, that was a train wreck, right? And then talking to my sister about, all these different things that I felt had gone wrong. I decided, because she's like, well, send me the replay. I said, I'm not sending it out because the replay is horrible. It's got all these weird things in how it recorded. And I decided to send it to my sister just so she could watch it. And I was watching it then as I was sending it. And I was like, the only places this is really horrible is when my brain was saying, oh my God, this is so horrible. And I got to the point where I was listening to it. But everything up until the point, like, I knew that the reason it happened was all of a sudden my brain won. My mind story took over, and I started to believe it. But when I was watching it, I realized everything, even when my brain was already saying, this is really horrible, was not horrible.
Yeah, it sounds like you were going through an emotional wave as an emotional person. You needed to kind of experience that wave of all the different emotions about your class to kind of settle and realize, what, it wasn't that bad. And actually, success is a sort of crappy teacher. You learn way more from your so-called failures or things that don't go right. Yeah.
The third line is always alive in the sixth line, no matter what phase we're in. And I always think Kelly Ruby Hansen was my second guest on Sunday Story Hour. She's the one who pointed out, and it's really one of those things where I'm like, oh yeah, why did I never realize that? Whenever we do something new, and this is probably true of any profile type to a certain degree, but for the sixth line, for sure, there is this trial and error learning from what doesn't work. Then there's the taking it in, observing phase of learning. And then there's the, okay, I'm just going to do me, and I'm going to do it the way it works. And, and that's how things happen. And so to see but for me, the big shift was after that class to be able to be grateful for it and look at it as such a valuable set of learning experiences that are going to make my next one so much better, because I'm going to be able to tell my brain, settle down, you're fine. Right? Because I know that it's fine, right? And whatever it is what it's supposed to be. So
Yep.
that's another thing I've really realized. So, okay. So back to your talk, you were talking about the narrative, and I don't know if I cut you off before you finished talking about that part, but.
Well, one thing you just said, whatever it is, it is. And that was a part of my talk, that we are so fixated on interpreting every event, every situation, and trying to make meaning of it. Even I'm guilty of this. When I look at my chart, I try to think, okay, I did this the other day. Where is that in my chart that could explain it, right? But my husband gave me this beautiful idea of a way to sort of reframe things. And he's just this very chill 3-5 projector. And he says, it is what it is all the time. And it used to really frustrate me because I thought he just didn't care enough about what was going on to form an opinion. But what he's doing is he's just allowing things to come, to be, and to pass, and not everything needs an interpretation. So by doing that, it's very liberating. It's very nice to kind of give yourself a break and not always have to make things mean something, especially something profound, because we tend to go deep and want to make something, this means this about me. No, sometimes things just happen, and that's okay. So it's that's one thing I love about helping people with their narrative, is there are oftentimes things that they focus on that it's one of those it is what it is situations, and you can think it to death and try to make sense of it, but where's that going to get you? It just keeps you in a loop, and it's really not very productive. So let's get you out of that thinking mind and just feeling into your body about what's the next thing.
Right. Yeah, I remember you talking about that. And in fact, those in the group will remember I shared a blog post from Tiffany. I'm forgetting Tiffany's last name, sorry, but she was commenting on how much that it is what it is idea had really been resonating with her and how much it helped her. And yeah, I tend to get, for those of you who know me, I tend to get in my head and try to figure out the meaning of things a lot. And now realizing that the figuring out is not what any of us are meant to do, right? At least about ourselves. We're meant to ask a question and just kind of wait for the answers to drop in and show up, right? So if it is what it is and we're like this, then just, if we're supposed to know something about it, it'll just show up for us, right? And then, we don't need to do this like deep, hard work to get the answers, to understand why it was what it was. If it had a meaning, right? It'll just show up. Yeah. So, we'd have a few people watching, and I would love to know if anybody has any comments or questions for Lindsay. So please, if you do, put those in the chat so that I can share those before we run out of time. But let's talk a little bit about being a 6-2, finding out about being a 6-2, because you're on the roof, and your husband's a 3-5. Okay, so so when you first found this, you were already on the roof then.
Yes.
And did you feel like, reflecting on that, were you able to say, oh, I remember, I can resonate with when I went on the roof? Like, did you feel like there was?
Oh yeah. There I can kind of pinpoint what was happening around my Saturn return and everything. It was a very kind of pivotal time in my life. But what I had found, what I realized most when I looked at this whole 6-2 profile, was all the sort of experimenting that I did in my first 30 years, and how I wanted a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and just kind of soaking everything in, and just being very open and very curious. That's a big reflector trait as well, but it is part of that 6 line. And then I had a pivotal time in my life right around that age 30, and looking back, I'm like, of course. And it's funny, my dad is also a 6-2 reflector, and he had about the exact same experience that I did when he was around 30. And just seeing that was really, really interesting. I grappled a little bit with what it meant to be on the roof, because in sort of technical terms, it makes it sound like we're stepping back out of society, out of the depths of of involvement with human design, and we're just kind of sitting back and watching, and that didn't really resonate with me. And what I realized was it's more about I think being a little more expansive and mindful around the broader themes that are going on, and using the first 30 years, the wisdom that comes from that, to try to make sense of things. And I will say a lot of things have made more sense for me while I've been on the roof. And so I'm just so curious to see what's going to happen next, and like what the next, 10 years or whatever are going to bring. And then coming off the roof, that'll be really fun.
Yeah, I always felt like the way that when you read about the 6th line and the 3 phases, so for those who are not 6 lines or don't know or have not investigated enough, the idea of a 6 line profile is that up until your Saturn return, you kind of live life thinking you're a 3rd line. So you're learning through what doesn't work. There's this experiential learning, lots of trying all kinds of things, sometimes some crazy things, having experiences that people often look at like, what did you think was going to happen when you did that, right? But you learn through this trying of all kinds of things, but you don't have the innate resiliency that a 3rd line has. So your body just kind of goes, what are you doing to me? I'm done. And by the time your Saturn comes in at your Saturn return, it's like teaching you these lessons, which your Saturn gates are what again? What are your Saturn gates?
I don't know that offhand. That's
your Saturn gate is 28, which is the gate of struggle, and 50, which is the cauldron. That's all about nurturing. And so your struggle, the gate of struggle, or it's not struggle, it's part of the channel of struggle. It's the gate of the game player. It's the gate of the adventurer. It's all about life having meaning. And gate 50 is all about, it's part of the defense circuit. It's this nurturing mama bear energy of I'm going to protect my tribe. But for me, mine is the gate of the narrative, right? I have gate 13 for both of mine. So for me, when I went on the roof, it was really about who am I, right? Like Saturn was like, who do you think you are? What are you doing? This is not who you are. That's what Saturn was saying to me. You're trying all this stuff and it's not working because that's not who you are. And so I went up on the roof, and a lot of that time was kind of just gently trying all these things and figuring out who I was. I went from like crazy downtown Chicago, up all night kind of lifestyle to, in the suburbs, mom wearing, simple clothes I picked up off of when I was shopping at Costco or something, just for a little while, like so far of a switch, right? Like I'm going to be simple, and tried all these different things, and then went through all these gamuts of things in the whole. So the roof itself was not the same. I mean, towards the end of the roof, I was working in retail fashion again, but it's all this like investigating of things on a much less, it doesn't have the same danger, like crazy risky behavior that the first phase has. We're still figuring things out, right? And then we come off the roof at 50, and for me, Saturn again was like, okay, so who are you? Mm-hmm. You did the mom thing. Your child is grown. You've gone into these different things. Now, who are you? And so when I came off the roof, there was this deep feeling of, I know who I am, and I got to start actually being it. So it's hard for me to separate the themes of my Saturn gates from the role model, the 3-phase process. And so the being on the roof is a lot of figuring out the themes of your Saturn gates, I think, really come into it, even though we always talk about it in terms of your Chiron, coming off of it as part of your Chiron. So anyway, but that's my thoughts on it. So.
Yeah, I think that being on the roof, and I mean, being a reflector, there's always, reflectors are, just innately curious. that's why we're completely open. So we're influenced by all these different things, and it's allowing ourselves to experience this curiosity without any commitment. And that's being on the roof. It has given me this sense of it's okay to dive deep on an area, something I'm curious about. Like I went pretty deep into gardening and growing my own food, but I haven't committed to doing this for the rest of my life. It's something, it's almost like a test run to see how it feels. And I'll do it as long as it's fun, and then I can just drop it if I don't want to. But I think that's a big part of being a reflector, is allowing ourselves to have space for curiosity and just exploring. And one thing, I don't know if we're going to chat about this, but the reflector's sign of alignment is this surprise, right? Which is a very, for me, that the word surprise doesn't land very well. It's not like a surprise, like it's a big party or anything like that. The way I like to explain it is more like childlike wonder. So it can be something that just kind of sparks your interest, like, ooh, or something that just makes me light up a little bit inside. And I mean, there's a lot of things that it kind of pokes at, and a lot of it from the outside might seem like excitement or eagerness, but it just feels very, very much like, I want to know more about this thing. So that's why if I'm ever, reading something online and I find myself opening new browser tabs and searching and searching and searching, and then I find myself going into Amazon wanting to buy a book on it, that's how I know that I've kind of gone down that little rabbit hole, and that's where I stop it. Because I can't tell you the number of times when my curiosity and that surprise has led me to make decisions quickly, and that's something that reflectors always have to kind of watch out for, because otherwise we end up making these decisions and then you have buyer's remorse.
Well, I think the open head in general has a tendency to go down lots of rabbit holes and think we have to know all the answers, and look into for all those things in there. And I constantly have I just told my husband, I think I'm gonna have to upgrade my MacBook, because it's constantly telling me application memory, you're out of application memory, because I have so many tabs open, because let me open this and let me open this, and I got to look back to this, and and now we get all these things that run on so much memory because they're all doing crazy things in the background. But yeah, so the signature emotion is surprise, and then the not self. So when you're not alignment,
that's disappointment. And disappointment is a great teacher. I'll say for reflectors, disappointment is not an end state. It's not, if you feel disappointment, you just stop what you're doing. It's a sign to let you know that you're maybe moving away from your most aligned self. And then your responsibility is to take another path and see how that feels. But where disappointment comes from is we are experiencing a lot of conditioning, and there can be times when the conditioning helps us feel safe, it helps us feel good, helps us feel acknowledged and recognized. So we continue to do a behavior like that to try to get those feelings. And then we get very disappointed when those feelings don't show up. And so it's kind of this loop where the more you allow your conditioning to drive how you feel, the more disappointed you're going to be. So for example, there was a time in my life where going to weddings or birthday parties or something like that, it felt very exciting and very like lively for me. But then I always had this expectation of feeling a certain way when I would go to a wedding or go to an event. And I'm a human being. I grow, I change, I evolve. And it got to a point where going to those places started to feel heavy, and it started to feel like a drain on my energy, but I was clinging to it because I wanted that feeling of like excitement and just, that energy. And I had these expectations that I had to let go of. So now when I go to an event, I try to have no expectations. Even when I was giving the presentation at the Human Design Conference, no expectations about what's going to come of it, how it's going to go. I'm there to serve. I'm going to do my best and see how it goes, because that disappointment, man, it hurts. It hits hard, but it's like I said, it's not an end point. It's not a sign that you need to stop, like full stop and just sit in that kind of discomfort. It's a sign that, okay, where have I allowed myself to be attached to a certain feeling that didn't end up showing up? And sometimes this also comes when we expect other people to react in certain ways. What I found, like with my husband, I'll be excited about something that my curiosity has led me towards. Like I said, gardening, right? Like that's something that really excites me. When I share my excitement with him and he doesn't react, I used to get very disappointed because I'm like, how can somebody not share this excitement or this enthusiasm? But what I've realized is that
You're reflecting my life right now. Just
I realized that the childlike wonder, this surprise, these things that feel like so fun for me, I don't need anybody else to experience that in order for me to experience it. So it's okay that my husband does not care about my gardening. I'll share it with him with no expectations.
right. Right. So I'm curious how when because you work with all these reflectors who find you, and like what, like if we have people in our lives, we all have people in our lives, we have no idea what their human design charts are, right? Yes, I'm sure a lot of us ask people for stuff and run their charts, but the majority of people in our lives, we don't know what their designs are. So what would you say is you might be a reflector if, what would be like your top few things you would say?
The one thing I see in myself and a lot of other reflectors that I work with is this whole chameleon tendency. So when I was growing up, my sister used to always tell me, I can tell who you're hanging out with this week by the type of music you listen to. Because it's like I would meet somebody and I would want to know them and kind of go deep, and they liked a certain kind of music. So then I would start listening to music. And then when I'd meet somebody else, it would be a different type of music. And so that's kind of my telltale sign. If I see anybody who is like very fluid with how they take up hobbies and kind of take them and leave them, right?
Right.
That kind of that's one sign that I kind of look for, but also energy. And I don't mean like excitement and things like that, because I can be very excited just depending on, how I'm spending my energy, but feeling like things that most people get excited by and energized by tends not to be the same for reflectors. So for example, like I had a job where I was working for government, and they'd go into work and they would, put their nose down and just, type away and work for 8 hours straight. Like I was all over the place. I could not sit still for that amount of time. I needed to divide my day into little pockets that would give me some kind of rest. So I couldn't sit through 8 hours of meetings. And I find a lot of reflectors are the same way. It's like trying to do the things that look normal, having a 9 to 5 job, jamming our schedules packed with activities. They don't work for reflectors. And so you'll see a lot of reflectors who are burnt out because of that. But I mean, reflectors being such good chameleons, sometimes you can't tell if someone's a reflector because they're being very conditioned by their surroundings and who they spend their time with. It's a lot more subtle, and sometimes there kind of is no way to tell.
Right, because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking like the first thing you said, and I was like, well, that's kind of just that's very common with anybody with an open G, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part you're talking about, well, that's anybody with an open sacral. So I guess if you just start thinking, okay, well, I've been going through all these different things, and it sounds, it feels like, there's somebody who avoids, tends to avoid confrontation. That's open emotional center. And they feel a lot of pressure to do things. That's open root. So I guess if you start to notice all the open center qualities in a person,
Yeah.
that might tend to be. So so you have a definite advantage over most reflectors, I would guess, in the fact that your father was a reflector. So even if you didn't know he was a reflector, he was, and he felt that way, and that probably affected the way you were raised in some positive ways, compared to maybe reflectors who are raised. I know somebody who is a manifesting generator and her husband's a manifester and they have a reflector son. And,
Mhm.
so that's going to be very different. Or, if you have two generator types raising a reflector, that's going to be very different. So, what do you wish that parents knew for raising a reflector child?
It's one of those things where even for adults, having the language to be able to express what it's like to be a reflector can be a challenge. So I can't imagine a parent trying to seek any kind of advice from their reflector child in terms of tell me what you need to, to be supported. So for a parent, I would say that the biggest thing is to allow the child to change their mind and give that sense of safety, and also give them lots of time to make decisions. One thing so you mentioned my upbringing. So my mom is a manifesting generator, and she has a very big personality. And so my dad acted as a manifesting generator for my whole life. It's only now looking back that I can see kind of areas where his true reflector self has sort of come out. But I have 3 siblings who are all generators. So I grew up in this like intense energy. And I was always under pressure to do things on other people's schedules. And that's where I found it most challenging, because I didn't have time to explore and to feel things deeply. It's like I was always scheduled and always expected to be doing. So for a parent who knows that their child is a reflector, I would say like giving them time to have downtime and do whatever they want. Like let them get lost in an activity, but don't expect them to carry it out to completion. Like I was chatting with someone at the conference who has a reflector child, and I said to her, if you're signing your child up for soccer or whatever it is, instead of doing the whole season, let them do a drop-in and see how that works out for them, because they might like it one day and hate it the next. And it can be a sense of frustration for parents when you sign your child up for a whole season's worth of activities and you pay those fees and things like that. And so, I mean, then you put yourself in a situation where you're either going to force your kid to do it, or you're going to be upset that they wasted your money. So those are just a few little things to help out. But I mean, it totally goes against society, right? We're taught to commit to something and take it through to fruition. We're taught to be consistent in who we are. I would say also for parents, resist putting titles on your child. Like I was told my whole life that I was a shy child. I wasn't shy. As a reflector, I like to have deep conversations with people, and superficial conversations are just a waste of my time. So I'm not going to connect with somebody who's a stranger. And so sometimes I would just withdraw, and my parents called me shy, and that never resonated with me. I didn't feel shy. But it's easy to see from the outside and say, okay, this child isn't acting the way that most children act, so it must mean that they're whatever.
Yeah, and I would imagine as a child, you were very sensitive to the energy a person was putting out. And so also as a second line, as a that hermit natural,
Yeah.
you have a tendency to go within anyway. But when you're with someone and it didn't feel right, there would be this pulling back. And, yeah, we tend to label stuff, and then people tend to grow into those labels in a lot of
Yes.
cases, right? So, and I have to apologize. I don't have any cough drops or anything, and I'm like,
Oh, Kathy. Oh.
yeah, I wasn't like this yesterday. It was not quite in this hacking stage, so I apologize. I'm sure it's lovely to watch. But I really think that the reflector as a barometer, right, is something that people can get a little bit afraid of, right? Do you feel that? Or you even said I think it was you who said sometimes people want you to
Perform. Yeah. It's something where people who are aware of human design can tend to have expectations of what each type is going to be like. So it's like if I'm meeting a generator, I'm like, okay, do something, do things. You have all this energy. Let's see you do stuff. But for reflectors, especially because we're so rare, it can be like, okay, show me who I am. And it's like, you know, they kind of sit in front of you just waiting for that, you know, that advice or sign or whatever it is to give them a glimpse of who they really are. But that really happens with a more, I would say, like a deeper connection, a deeper interaction. It's not going to be something where the other person is necessarily going to be able to see themselves in the reflector if it's just a quick encounter. But on the other side, reflectors are going to feel you no matter what. So whether we choose to engage and have that conversation, that's a choice that we make. So for example, I can walk into a room and I can feel who I'd like to stay away from. And maybe I don't know why. It's just a sense that I get, or maybe they're standing in a certain way and I'm thinking, you know what, if I go and try to talk to them, I'm going to end up disappointed because I know the conversation or our interaction isn't going to be, it's not going to be, I don't know, productive maybe. So yeah, it is one of those things where sometimes, you know, asking a reflector to perform almost has the opposite effect, because what it will do is cause us to come back up to our thinking mind and think, okay, I need to think about how that person's acting or behaving or the things that they say, when really it's more of a body feeling. So it's almost like, you know, I feel a little bit like a zoo animal sometimes, like people outside are watching me and expecting me to put on a show, but if you just let me loose in my natural habitat, I can do a much better job of helping people. And that's
Yeah.
largely because I'm going to pick out the people who I can sense are maybe open and willing or eager to have a conversation or to share something with me, that I can work with.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. The very first time I ever met, knew I was meeting reflectors, I remember there were two at an event I was at. It was at a human design event. And one of them, when she came in, she said that she was not staying because she did not feel, I mean, she felt great in the room with the event, but the place that it was at, she felt so misaligned.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. Like, you know, that she was so in touch. She had come to this area to go to this event. She stayed for the one day's event, but she said, I'm not spending the night here because it just feels too wrong. I'm leaving after today. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. And so to watch how people really process, and there were two reflectors in the room and they were night and day different kind of personalities. So, you know, it's important that people understand that, you know, all reflectors are not the same, you know, just like any other type, there's so many variables in not just your chart, but also in the way, the spectrum of how you express that chart. But so that feeling like you're in the right place, you know, not just with the right people. Can you speak to how that has been?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. And also thank you for saying that not all reflectors are the same, because it's very easy to see reflectors being the 1% and assume that we're all going to be the same kind of barometer. But like you mentioned, we'll have different profile lines, we'll have different gates that are activated, different stage of life, different experience, all that kind of stuff. So everybody is one of a kind. That's why human design is a science of differentiation, because you may have the exact same chart as somebody, but you're going to experience things differently. It's the same thing for reflectors. But back to the whole environment thing, two of the most important things, well, actually, four of the most important things for reflectors: where they work, who they work with, where they live, and who they live with. And that's because energy is so important and such a significant thing for reflectors. We are guided by the lunar cycle, which means we're going to experience all 64 gates in 28 days instead of across the span of like a year, like the solar beings get. So we're going through this roller coaster of different gates, and we need to be in places that are going to feel supportive and safe, and not things that are going to make us feel uncomfortable on top of the strange way that we're going to have to navigate the gates. And it's the same with people, because places give off energy, people give off energy, even animals give off energy, everything does. So I can totally relate to that reflector who said, I'm not going to stay, because that's my go-to thing. When I commit to going to an event, I say, I can't guarantee how long I'm going to stay, but I'll show up, right? Because I want to always give myself that out. If I am not feeling like it's a good space to be in, it's gonna make me feel sick. I'm gonna be, miserable, and that's not helpful for anybody else there. So I don't want to keep myself in a place or around people that is going to have that kind of negative effect.
Yeah, and for those who have not, who don't understand, why do the gates of the moon affect the reflector in this strong way? When you have so much openness, and the moon goes through all 64 gates, like you said, in like 28 to 29 days, depending, somewhere in between. What happens is every time the moon gate shifts, there's a great likelihood that it will define a new center for the reflector. Now, sure, it can happen for all of us, but because we already have definition in our chart, we have this sense of knowing ourselves as a specific, our definition is where we know ourselves to be consistent. And so we tend to identify ourselves as that way, even if we don't logically understand it, that we feel this way is who we are. But the reflector is completely open, so they're constantly just amplifying other people's energy. And when wherever that gate of the moon is, there's going to be a strong likelihood that that's going to define a center for you, that's going to give you this new feeling. And it's very easy for in that moment to make a decision based on defined energy that is only fleeting, and it's going to be gone. So that's the whole idea of waiting the lunar cycle, if I've explained that correctly.
Yeah, great explanation. We can experience 2 to 3 different gates every single day. So you can imagine, like you showed my chart, right? Those different gates would be lighting up 2 to 3 times a day with these different channels. Sometimes it makes a channel, sometimes not. Sometimes it defines a center, sometimes not. And that's a different experience for reflectors multiple times a day. So yeah, we're going to get this energy, and maybe it's an energy of excitement or an energy of action, like physical doing. I've been outside doing yard work, and I feel like I can go, and then come like 2 p.m. or whatever the time is, it's like a switch gets flipped and I'm done. And I cannot force myself to go beyond that, because I know that energy just isn't there anymore. And the more you kind of play around with it and experience it and just be open and non-judgmental to these changes, the easier it gets to know that it's just going to be an experience. It is what it is. I don't need to, draw any conclusions about it. I don't need to make it mean anything about me, and neither does anyone else. Like, it's just something that is coming and going. So sometimes, have fun with it. I like to play around. Sometimes I'm very creative, and I get a lot of inspiration. And one thing I've learned is that when that inspiration hits, no matter what time of day, it's like I drop everything and cater to that inspiration, because I've tried to schedule my inspiration, and it does not work at all. Like, what a waste of time.
Well, one of the things I found interesting too was when I asked you at conference if you would be interested in coming on here, and you were able to tell me right then, yes, I would like to do this. Yeah. And I was expecting you to say, well, let me get back to you in the lunar cycle. But explain how that works, how you know which things are
yes.
okay. moment.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that, because it is easy to see that whole way to lunar cycle and think that every decision a reflector makes has to go through that cycle. And for me, when I decided I wanted to serve other reflectors and share my gifts as a reflector, I made some decisions and felt through them for quite a while to know how I wanted to express that. And for me, I use my values as something in addition to, and also very complementary to, my human design. So my values are freedom, impact, and growth. So as long as it serves those values and it feels aligned with me, then it's a yes. And so what I decided early on was, I'll get on any, a podcast. I've done the podcast circuits. I'll give presentations, even if it's a little bit scary and outside my comfort zone, for the greater purpose of growth and the impact that I want to have. So for me, I've already made those decisions. It's not a decision, an individual person decision. It's a broad decision. So I decided that I wanted to give presentations and speak at venues and on platforms where I can have impact. And so once that decision is made, when those opportunities come up, I can know for certain that it's right for me. And of course, it always goes through a bit of a body check as well, because there have been times when maybe I don't click very well with a person. So in that case, I would say, give me some time and I'll get back to you. But when Kathy and I were chatting, it was like an easy, yes, of course, I'll come on and chat with you.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, but now you just outed yourself. So now if you tell somebody, oh, I'm going to wait 28 days, they're going to be like, oh, she doesn't, my energy didn't feel right. But that's okay.
It's okay. I'm okay with
Right? Yeah,
that.
exactly. And that's the thing. And two is sometimes people would take that, and I shouldn't have even said it that way. Like someone's energy not feeling right isn't necessarily a thing where it means there's something wrong with that person. Sometimes the energy dynamics, if somebody, and that's getting into a whole can of worms we don't have time to get into, but sometimes if somebody has specifics in their chart that put you in a lot of compromised situations because you don't have any defined channels. So everybody's channels, like where I have a channel and you have a hanging gate, it compromises that energy for you in a way. So if somebody's compromising a lot of strategic gates for you, a lot of very specific things, you might feel the need to wait and really know whether it feels comfortable just because of how that energy feels. It has nothing to do with the quality of person
Absolutely.
or of that person's energy. So
Yeah.
I just want to clarify that we sometimes make up stories of, whether that means somebody's a good person or, oh, their energy's off or whatever. It's not always the case.
One thing
Yeah.
I will share is that for reflectors, more often than not, it's an issue of energy intensity more than it is about the person. So sometimes somebody, like I've had experiences where people come to me and I can feel they have big energy, big ideas, and I need time to make sure that I'm making decisions not based on their energy and their excitement, but that it's more about what I can share and how I can add value. So it's trying not to get lost in what the other person's energy is. And so for those reasons, I would need more space, right? That person is not good, bad, otherwise. It's just their energy has sort of confused me or like shaken me up a little bit, and I need to let it settle before I can make that decision.
Yeah. And we are actually a few minutes over. All of a sudden, like I looked, and then this always happens to me. We got plenty of time. Oh, it's all over, right? So surprise, surprise. I'm reflecting your surprise in that. So anyway, I just wanted to say a little note on what we were just talking about here to let people know that I am redoing my class that I said had all the little glitches in or whatever. And it's going to be fabulous. It's going to be on Tuesday, and we're going to talk about some energy dynamics similar to what we were just talking about, how we sometimes feel things away and then our mind makes up a story about it. And that's a lot of what we're going to get into in that class. So, but I want to thank you, Lindsay, and I really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks to everybody who's here, either in the comments or watching this later on the replay or on Zoom. I mean, we're on Zoom, on YouTube. So, Lindsay, how do people reach out to you if they have interest in? I know you predominantly work with reflectors, but what would be some ways that people might want to reach out to you, and for what?
Yeah, so I have a landing page that people can go to. My website is reflectorbydesign.com. So that's kind of the general site. But if you go to reflector.com/links, you'll get all the different areas that that my business offers. So I have the Reflector blog. So whether you're just interested in learning more about reflectors, or maybe you have a reflector in your life and you'd like to get kind of a bit more insight into how to support them, there's also a spot there for programs. And right now my programs are closed, so there's a wait list, but I do offer reflector specific programs and programs for all types. So if you get on the wait list, you'll be the first to know about any upcoming programs, and then you can decide using your strategy and authority if it's a good fit for you. I am also on Instagram at Reflector by Design, and you can reach out there. And on my website also, there is a button in the reflectorbydesign.com/links where you can ask a reflector question. So even if you're not a reflector, if you have a question about, what it's like to be a reflector, what I like to do is answer those in a blog post so that you can get some detailed information and maybe share it with other people that you think would benefit from it as well.
Great. Okay. That's super. And if you wouldn't mind, after we get done here, you maybe pop the links in the comments on this thread so that people can find them easily. It's always nice to be able to just click on it. So every week we share stories of how my guests have come to understand themselves in a more loving, empowering way through the lens of human design. How you think and speak about yourself matters. Human design can show you the reframe of not only your own story, but the stories you tell yourself about your relationships. If you're ready to start living a better story, I'd love to help guide you. To work with me as a mentor, you can DM me or set up a free discovery call at kathybashanko.com. And we'll see you next week. Peace out.
Thank you so much, Kathy.